Welcome to the show. Here, I speak with experts and experts at life in heartfelt conversations designed to help us pause, choose intentionality over hustle, and discover joy, meaning, and connection in our everyday lives.
And during that day of painting the community center, we started talking, and that's when we started. I had this feeling that I had no foundation, no core, and everything was built on something that wasn't solid, kind of like how people describe imposter syndrome. And on that peace march, I ended up getting pregnant unexpectedly on the pill and had to decide what to do. I went through a process of deciding I thought I might get an abortion. I thought I might put the baby up for adoption. I was only 19. So again, from external, on your CV, it doesn't say dropped out of college and got pregnant at 19. And it wasn't until my late 20s, 27, that I went back to college and got my first degree, my bachelor's degree, listening to myself about what I was, who I was, what I knew, what I didn't, and not having my success or failure in school define me, and that who I was not the same as what my accomplishments were.
Welcome to the show, Elise. It's really nice to catch up with you after so long, and really happy to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm getting right to it. When anyone sees your CV, there's so much good stuff there. I mean, it's impeccable in terms of your experience in the academic world, in the industry. But what I remember from when I saw you first, which was many years ago, is your very interesting life arc. Could you talk about your early years? Where did you meet your husband?
I mean, that really goes into things that are off the CV, but yeah, I'm happy to talk about this idea, and I'll get to my husband in a second, but I want to emphasize that even though my CV or my LinkedIn profile looks impeccable, it really isn't. Like, there's all sorts of things that would look not impeccable. In actuality, breaks in terms of my trajectory, failures by other people's standards throughout my history. And so there's no, I hope that's what we'll end up talking about a lot, is that there's no right way to do things, and that you can actually do things that, again, look like to yourself and certainly to the external world as failures or struggles, and end up in your 50s with a CV that looks impeccable to other people. So there's no right way to do it. I'm definitely testament to that. And how I met my husband is part of that, because we met when both of us had dropped out of college. I had dropped out of college my first time. He dropped out and never went back. And we both were on a peace march, like a good old-fashioned peace march, that was walking across the United States. So I think most people listening know how big the United States is. It's quite large, from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., as a way in the 80s. This was in 1986. To protest nuclear weapons and to call for the U.S. and what was then the Soviet Union to disarm their nuclear weapons. So the reason why we both could do this, besides maybe it being something that we believed in, was because we had both dropped out of college and had nothing going on. And so when I dropped out, I mean, I was a high achieving student and things like that, but I never knew if I would go back. And so we were both on this peace march that had all sorts of trials and tribulations, and we can talk about more of that as we go on, or not. That's a whole podcast of itself. But I was 19, he was 20. We were lost in a lot of ways, lost souls, but embracing this new adventure. And we sort of had noticed each other, because we were, the young people hung out in different parts, different places than the older people on the march. So we noticed each other. But as this peace march was walking across the country, we ended up near Las Vegas. That was the route that we took out of Los Angeles. And the in the U.S., there's a big nuclear test site in Nevada, where Las Vegas is. The atomic weapons, they made a test site in Nevada, and it was still operational at that time. They did all the tests underground by then, not overground, but they would still test nuclear weapons underground. So we got hooked up with some people that were doing protests at that test site, and they took advantage of this peace march coming through and talked us all about doing these protests. So my husband and I were both protesting on the same day, even though we only knew each other, from afar, and we both got arrested for trespassing. That's how these protests work. You deliberately protest by trespassing, they arrest you, and then the idea is that instead of paying the $600 fine, you say, I won't pay the fine, and they put you in jail for a protest. So it was like 6 days. So we were both in this really tiny town. The whole thing completely overwhelmed the local jail and court system because it was just the municipality that was this test site is in the middle of nowhere because it's a big thing, and so it completely overwhelmed this jail, and they didn't even have any space for women because they didn't usually arrest women. So the women who got arrested that day were in the regular cells. The men got put in the temporary cell, and they didn't know what to do with us, so they had us do some community service because they were like, we don't know what to do with these people that have overwhelmed our jail. And so we sort of, at these times, like they had us wash the sheriff's car, and then they had us paint a community center. And during that day of painting the community center, we started talking, and that's when we started falling in love. And then we ended up falling in love during this peace march that took 9 months, and we've been together ever since.
Wow. We'll definitely come back to that because I have many questions around that. But going back a little to the beginning, why did you drop out?
I dropped out of college after just one semester, and it was a time in my life where that was actually it was the beginning, or well, maybe the middle of a pretty intense time that ended up being a complete restructuring myself and it stemmed actually from about a year and a half earlier, where as a really high performing high school student, the world's ahead of you, straight A student, you can do anything, great, you're doing so well. I went into a big depression and ended up having sort of a depression on the sides of my brain for quite a long time that I had been ignoring. And it ended up spiraling very quickly into a suicidal state when I was 16 and attempting suicide, and then failed, didn't succeed, obviously, and then didn't tell anyone for over a week. And because of the circumstances of my life, my mom didn't even know about it. She thought I was going to school every day, but I wasn't. I was just riding the buses around the San Francisco Bay Area. Eventually, the school finally talked to my mom, said, I went by Lisa then. Lisa hasn't been to school, and they discovered it. But this process of going through this suicidal phase cut me down to the core of who I was. Like my experience is that, at least for me, when you go through that, you have to shed yourself of all the things that tie you to the world. You have to completely let go. And in that process, get to something that's like the core of you with no accomplishments or expectations. And coming back from that severing was felt almost impossible. I didn't know how to live in the world again. And so I finished up my senior year by basically, I had enough credits, so I hardly had to take any classes, went to counseling, kind of stabilized a bit, but then decided almost as a whim, as I started feeling a little better, I would go to college after all. But then after a semester, I realized that this was, I had this feeling that I had no foundation, no core, and everything was built on something that wasn't solid, like kind of like how people describe imposter syndrome, but like at this super deep level that I had no real foundation. And at that stage, when I quit college, I actually felt pretty good about it. I wasn't even in a depression, I felt like I had to grow myself again with a solid foundation before I could even think ever about doing anything again. So from the external world, I was college dropout. Maybe they knew about my breakdown, maybe not. Then, as this process was happening, I heard about this peace march and decided to. So anyway, I quit college with a guy. We had a relationship. It was okay. Then it started breaking up, and we both decided to go on this peace march together. And I had this. By that time, when I started, I was not depressed at all, but I really embraced this idea that I had no idea about anything. And I was done pretending that I knew anything about anything and that I was gonna grow myself from the ground up again. And I thought it might take years. And on that peace march, I ended up getting pregnant unexpectedly on the pill. Um, and had to decide what to do. I went through a process of deciding I thought I might get an abortion. I thought I might put the baby up for adoption. I was only 19. So again, from external, you know, like, oh, on your CV, it doesn't say dropped out of college and got pregnant at 19. But I ended up deciding to keep the baby. Knox and I decided to, my husband decided to stay together. And I felt over the next 5 years, I remember that when we met his parents, who were not happy about all this because they're very traditional, and his dad said, "What's your 5 year plan?" And I was like, uh, I didn't even know how to. I was like, I couldn't see beyond the horizon, and I was embracing that. I was like, I don't know. My plan is to find an environment where me and my baby can develop into the people we're going to be. And he was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, this doesn't make sense. But I feel like that's what happened, and that's what I did. And I remember, like, 5 years later, I still had this metaphor in my mind, and I was like, I feel like I'm about, when I was on the Peace March, I was like a baby learning how to be myself, but in a grounded way. And now I feel like I'm about 5 years later, I was like, now I feel like I'm just starting like adolescence, but I have a foundation. And it wasn't until I was, let's see what year, 93. So it wasn't until my late 20s, 27, that I went back to college and got my first degree, my bachelor's degree. When I had two kids, it was years. I didn't know if I would ever go back. So all of the CV success that I have now came in a completely non-traditional way. I was a non-traditional student. I was a failure by the judgment of the way people think of success and failure. And I remember when I was a professor in the U.S. at colleges that are considered highly competitive, and the students were so stressed out, and they'd come just so worried about, oh, if I get a bad grade on this midterm, my life is over. If I don't get into med school, my life is over. And I'm like, you know, calm down. Like, you don't have to do everything perfect or everything like the way it's mapped out to have a successful life. And then I mean, I wouldn't go into all this, but I would tell them, like, I dropped out of college and got pregnant at 19, and I'm a professor now. Like, things can work out. You don't have to do things the right way.
I mean, there's just so much there. I really don't know how to react, honestly. But so many questions. So you said you met your husband on the Peace March. At what point did it feel like this relationship with him would stay?
Yeah, it's funny because back then, so I think you get the idea that I really embraced an alternative philosophy.
Hmm.
So by that time, I was very committed to this idea that I didn't believe in marriage. I didn't believe in legal marriage. I didn't even really believe in monogamy. I was like very, I don't know. I had all these ideas, and so when we got together, we in the end we actually got married in just a couple years, but it seemed like we weren't, because we were like, we're not going to get married. I remember my husband is like, we're not going to get married till gay people can get married. We were like opposed to it, but then we ended up decide, when we decided to get married, I was like, well, I guess if marriage doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter either way, so I'll get married. But so from that viewpoint, you might think that I didn't even, my parents were divorced. I had seen so much what I viewed in my, 19-year-old self as hypocrisy of traditional marriage, that I was very disdainful of the whole thing. So you might think that that means that I was didn't know we would stay together for a long time, because I was so committed to this idea that relationships, you needed to commit every day, not rely on a piece of paper. And but really deep down, I feel like, at least the way I remember it, I knew so early that this was something special. And um, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Like, I knew somehow this guy, the way we were together, it felt different for both of us. And I could tell I felt different for him. We just like felt like we could know each other and explore each other and let each other be who we really were. Not, he was also at this phase where he was kind of stripped to the core without these external accomplishments. And so we both really felt like that this idea of being able to be with someone who could meet you um, fully where you were, but not be intimidated or threatened by you, was really present from the very beginning. So when it wasn't like dating because we were on this peace march, but there were little, relationships here and there. And so I was, flitting around with this person and that person because I wasn't depressed anymore. So I was like, when you're not depressed, and then you fall in love with people, people fall in love with you. And as soon as we started getting together, I was like, went to this other guy's like, you know what? I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I'm going to explore things with Knox. So I'm not going to do anything else. We haven't decided to be exclusive, but I want to focus on this. And, that now we're together. Um, that was 86. So whatever, however many years, that's 38, 39 years. It's 20, it's 5, right? So it'll be, does that mean it'll be 40 years? And yeah, that it'll be 40 years
In
since we
26,
met
yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And was this at the same time? Did both of you feel this way at the same time, or was there like a lag between between the two of you?
I mean, I think we were feeling it at the same time. He knew that he wanted to be in what essentially was a committed marriage sooner than I did. I held on to this discomfort with the idea of marriage for longer than he did. So he asked me to marry him a number of times, and then I was, I want to be with you, but I want every day to commit myself. I don't want to have the state be involved, kind of thing. And then, like I said, eventually I was like, you know what? If it doesn't matter to me, then it shouldn't matter either way. So, and it seems like it's important to other people. So I'm happy to make this official. But so but none of that was because I didn't feel the love for him. So I feel like it was at a deep level, it was mutual, and that was part of what we both recognized. But we were very he was especially careful to give me my space to um, get there on my own, in part because that's what he loved about me. So
Tell me this, Elise. It really, I mean, your love story sounds like a fairy tale, but I think the bigger part is that you guys have been together for this many years. And I mean, I look at your Facebook and I see the sweet posts that you have on every anniversary. And I guess what I'm trying to get to is, it's, and I'm not saying it's easy, especially in today's day and age. I think it's very difficult to even find someone and feel those feelings. But how do you sustain this over a 40-year-old period? You grow differently, the other person grows differently. How does that pan out? How has that panned out
yeah,
for you?
It's interesting because we think about this, right? Of course, not that many people that we know have been together as long as us. We've seen a lot of, I mean, we've been together longer than either of my parents have been together with themselves or anybody else. Um, one of the funny things is that our experience is that it hasn't been hard. And we sometimes laugh about that, that when people say, oh, how have you been together for so long? And at least in the US, the little, news stories that are a feel good story, the people always say, it takes a lot of hard work. It's hard. And we're like, we laugh that it doesn't feel like it's been that hard. That's what's been so beautiful is that it's not hard for us to be together. Now, of course, there's challenge, we've had challenging times and stuff like that, but our relationship hasn't felt hard, and that's part of what it's our thing to come back to in life that's not hard in the face of everything else. And I think I remember this one time when I was going back to college, when I went back to college as an older adult, and this was at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon. It's a big state school, and it's not really it's very much set up for almost all the students, at least at that time, were traditional, just out of their, we call it high school in the U.S. I'm not sure but that first part of college that, most of the people start when they're 18, 19 years old. So it was very unusual for me to be as old as I was and married and with kids. As opposed to some universities are more set up for returning students or non-traditional students. So I was an outlier. Nobody, I was weird. And I remember I was in, like when you take science classes, you do labs and you get a lab partner. So I had a lab partner in uh, chemistry, and I think we must have had the same one for the whole term. And so we chat or whatever, and she was going on and on with me about how her and her boyfriend, she didn't know if it could work out because they were just so different. And she said, I mean, I'm a science major and he's an English major, how could it ever work out? And I was just like, by that time, um my husband was just fully committed. He was never going back to college. When he dropped out, he knew that his dropping out of college was because this was not for him at all. He had ended up becoming a firefighter and a paramedic, and he was the furthest thing from academia. And I was sitting here, deciding that by that time I decided to become biology and psychology major. I was exploring the idea of grad school. I was fully involved in this academic life. And I was like, I don't think that has to be a problem. You can have different uh, things that interest you and still love someone. And, I said something about my husband doesn't even have a degree and we work out. It doesn't matter if you have different majors. And she was just like, couldn't even believe it. So it is, this idea, it is amazing, right? Like if you think about who you are when you're 19 and who you are when you're 58, and you do go through so many changes. And so to find someone who can go through those changes with you it's not surprising that a lot of relationships don't work out because you truly could grow apart. I think for us, um, we always put our relationship at the core. Even when we had kids, we were like, we made sure to protect it. We still go on date nights, even at this age. We still take that time just for us, and we always tried to come back to this idea of being gentle with each other and giving each other the benefit of the doubt and trying to be, not have. I see so many situations where the couple starts to treat each other worse than anyone else. And we never wanted to do that. We always wanted to make sure that the way we were treating each other was assumed the best intentions and was gentle, that we didn't, if we said something the wrong way, that we tried to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And we would remind ourselves of that if we didn't do it. And I'm not sure how it continued to work, but it's not because we went on the same path. Now I'm a corporate scientist and he's a full-time farmer. Like, it's from an external perspective, it doesn't mean that we we have all the same interests or we do all the same things, but we really appreciate each other and are committed to this idea of helping each other. Uh, yeah, being gentle with each other. I don't know. I'm not sure why, but it's not because it's always so hard and we just kept working at it. It always felt like our love came easy.
That's just beautiful, Elise. And I'm just thinking, was this a conscious decision? Did one of you or both of you have this idea, this thing that you spoke about, giving each other the benefit of the doubt? It's so easy. I mean, I'm thinking of my relationship with my husband, and there are so many times when you assume the worst, and it's just that's the
Yeah.
easiest thing to sort of do. So uh, did you make a conscious call? Did you sit together and say, this is what we're going to do? If one person, I seem to be slipping more often than my husband a lot of the time, do you remind each other? How do you sort of keep this going?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I don't know if it was all like at one point, but I remember like especially early on, one of the differences we had is that I am and was a very loud, expressive person. And I grew up in a family that was loud and expressive and interrupting and even fighting and yelling and expressive. I think maybe you're similar. Um, I still, from the beginning of my school, I got the comment, she does well, but she talks too much. And even this year, at my end of year performance review, I got everybody appreciates you, but sometimes you need to let other people talk. So I'm like, this is me. And he is very different. He's not. He's more quiet. He's more internal. He grew up in a situation where his family didn't fight in ways that both sometimes in ways that wasn't healthy, but they didn't. He wasn't used to people yelling to work things out, and so early on, I remember in those first few years when I would get upset, I would yell, and he would shut down, and we had to learn to. I had to learn not to yell as much, and he had to learn to let me yell a little, and things like that that helped us say, like, I'm like, but I need to express myself, and then I'm like, but I need him to also hear me. So we had to figure out how to let each other be the way they were because we wanted to, because we had this goal on the other side, right? Like it's so that idea of like, do you want to be right or do you want to be together? So like when you're mad and you're like, I need to tell you why I'm right, but then if it's not working because they're shutting down because they can't handle yelling just at like that level, then but then also he had to learn to let me be who I was and open his mind up a little. So somehow that those types of things, learning uh, how we were how to navigate those simple things like in a marriage where you're you realize, oh, you grew up in a messy house, I grew up in a clean house, and so I don't these types of things, somehow realizing that we wanted to still be together. Somehow we had this idea that we wanted to, that if I was yelling, it didn't mean that I was trying to make him feel uncomfortable, and that if he wasn't listening, it wasn't because he was trying to dismiss me. And that I think it's things like that early on that helped us have this idea of like, let's assume the best instead of assume the worst. And then over years, it just became almost like a shorthand, like even now, say, remember, um, I'm we're assuming the best, even if we say it wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a handy trick.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I could potentially try with my own husband as well, and remind myself more than anything else that I need to stop assuming the worst. You said an interesting thing about I grew up in a clean house versus I grew up in a messy house. Now, have you come to some sort of an equilibrium with the level of messiness in the house?
We have. I mean, our house is much cleaner than I would probably be on my own, and it's maybe dirtier than his. I mean, over this, by this time, after all these decades, he does most of the cleaning. But it was hard. Like and I don't keep as much stuff, so there's less clutter just because there's less stuff. So yeah, I was definitely grew up in a chaotic, messy house and almost embraced that idea. That was part of my, free way of living is not being constrained by these bourgeois ideas of cleanliness. And he didn't need it to be like he wasn't trying to say, oh, I need my house to look like a super fancy thing, but he just again in a lot of clutter, it was hard for him to feel um, sane, I guess, And so again, this idea of like, why are you trying to make me be different than I am? And why do you have to live in filth becomes like, oh, what do you need to feel like you can move forward? So over the years, we've done different things. Like we've hired housekeepers when he was like, this is really important to me, but I see you don't have time. I don't have time. We've gotten rid of stuff so we don't have as much clutter. So we have a simpler house probably. And um, honestly, he does most of the cleaning. So um,
I can kind of see how this is
it's
going to pan
worked
out
out
for
in the end.
me over the years. I'm the one who's interested in keeping the house mess free, so not looking good for me.
Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting to think of. It's that idea of like just trying to think of all your relationships, and then having in your mind that with your partner, and then obviously your kids, but that trying to make sure that you're not treating them worse than the other people in your life. And that idea, I mean, of course, we all like the benefit of being so close to someone is that you don't have to put on a front. So you can be honest, but sometimes that honesty can go to feeling like you don't have to take care of it. And so the idea that you wouldn't take the same gentle care of your husband that you would or that he would of you than the clerk at the store. Like it's that idea of just trying to be uh, nice to each other, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
be gentle with each other.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like, the relationship is not equal? And now I'm just going into full relationship mode because this conversation is getting so rich. Do you ever feel like, I mean, whether it's you or him is sort of pulling more of the weight, and does that, if that happens at all, does that bother you?
Yeah, I mean, there's always phases, right, where that's the nature of, in a way, a good relationship is that you can carry the weight when the other one needs it. But at a really deep level, that I think was what attracted to me so much to him in the beginning is that feeling of equalness, but not resentment. Because I had had this experience. I mean, experience. I was 19, but I'd had these boyfriends before, and somehow either they had felt stupid. They weren't smart enough to keep up with me at the time, um, or they were, but they were really like they had to have the upper hand. And so I had this weird experience, or not weird, but I think a lot of women, right? You have this experience of either you get in a relationship and somebody like worships you because you're so awesome, but then they don't challenge you. They're not stimulating enough for you. Or you find people that are stimulating, but they need to push you down because they need to feel more powerful. Uh, and so the cool thing about Knox was that I really felt really early on that he was like my intellectual equal, but he didn't like feel the need to push me down. He was like he was so excited by the things he saw in me, and I felt so excited about like how I could have a somebody who could meet me full on. So at a deep level, I feel that equality all the time. Now, we definitely have had phases in our life where his job meant that I had to do almost all the responsibility for the kids, and times where my job meant that we had to move and he had to quit his job. So there's definitely been times where our circumstances were more impacted by the other person. And but I think because at a deep level we feel that equal, that we both bring the same amount of stuff to the table. Um, I haven't had that resentment, but it's we have little divisions of labor, and then sometimes those shift, but because I think at that core level we feel really like full partners, it that's okay with us.
And so you're talking
And
about a
that also
situation.
evidences itself, right, in the idea that now my husband works on our farm, so I'm the only one that has a outside job, so I bring in all the income, and I'm sure in India, but in the U.S. that still is unusual. There's all these stereotypes that the man should bring in the most money or at least an equal amount of money. And I think that that's part of why that doesn't bother us, is because we have, when I was going to grad school, he was bringing in all the money. We didn't think of it as something that had to be associated with certain gender roles.
You made an interesting point about different circumstances sort of putting different kinds of flux on the relationship. Do you remember sitting down and deliberately talking about it and acknowledging it, or is your relationship so amazing that you don't it's understood that this person is taking more of the weight and that's
Repeat
fine?
the question. Did we have a conversation about what exactly? What are you asking?
So the time when, for example, he had to pull more of the weight with the kids, for example, right? Versus now
Hmm.
maybe you're working and getting more of the money. So at different points in time, one person probably pulled in more weight, and that was okay. I understand that. But did you have a conversation with each other about it, or was it implicit?
Yeah, I mean, we would talk about it, especially like if one of us was going to do something that we knew would mean that the other one would have to put their career at a back seat. So we would always discuss it and say if that felt okay and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's always a fluid situation. So it's not like you have just one conversation. But yeah, especially when he decided to become a firefighter, that was a big commitment, because in the US, the way those roles work, they're really hard to get. And the first year, you're on probation for the whole year, and you really have to. It's a pretty big time commitment, and you have to be in really good shape. So he had to work out all the time, and he had to learn all these skills because it wasn't something that he had known he wanted to. A lot of people in the US, like these guys, know they want to be a firefighter from the time they're a little kid, so they prepare for it. He hadn't really done that, so he knew that it would be a big commitment for him to actually try to do this. And so, we talked about that. The biggest one, of course, was when I realized that I wanted to go to grad school and get a PhD, and how much that would mean that I would need him and the kids' support. And so the process of me applying to grad schools and deciding whether or not we as a family would be open to moving to wherever the best fit for grad school was for me. And so we definitely had that conversation, because it meant, again, these firefighter jobs, people get them and then they never leave. Like, it's one of the few jobs where people stay till retirement because they're so sought after. So it's not like if you're a firefighter one place, you can just you can laterally transfer. You kind of have to start at the beginning everywhere. So we weren't sure if he could even find another job in that area. We knew it would be hard. He'd have to go through the whole testing process again, all that kind of stuff. And so, we had lots of conversations about whether or not he felt able to quit his job that he got, that was difficult to get, and move. And so then we decided that we did feel comfortable taking that risk. And so when I applied to grad school, we explored moving wherever, I had the best opportunities, with some nuances, right? Like, as I had more choices, then we looked at what the opportunities were for him and decided on, I ended up going to Stanford for my PhD, and that was the best place for me. And it has a lot of municipal firefighting and paramedic jobs. So decided that together. And again, externally, almost everybody he worked with couldn't even understand this choice, because it seemed to them like he was leaving something that was so hard to get that they couldn't imagine that he was giving it up for me to go to school.
And did he find another job that he liked at Stanford? I mean, oh,
In nearby, in a
yes.
different municipality. But yes, he ended up getting a job. And then when I became a professor, he gave that up and we moved because academia is you really have to go where the jobs went. So during all of my academic life, he and the family moved for me every single time and had to start over.
That's quite unheard of, actually. I mean, even in India, I mean, I've definitely heard the other way around where the
Yeah.
woman and the kids are moving around, but this is definitely quite unheard of. So kudos to
Well, and that's
Knox.
and we had that all the way through because it's very common for the wives of professors to be accomplished but move, and then their careers are clearly second to the man who's a professor. And so even as we were doing it, it surprised people that this was occurring. It was sometimes awkward at faculty meetings when he would come and be the supportive spouse because everybody else was the wife. And even now, when we just got a car loan and put in our uh, application, he got a call saying, "I think you um, put it in wrong. It looks like you have your wife at the scientist job, and should it be flipped?" He's like, "No, that's correct." So those assumptions are still present.
Wow. Ah, let's hope these things will change sooner than later. But I want to backtrack a little and go to the bit where you said you went back to school as an older adult, and that would have been
Yeah.
really awkward. And one of the things that sort of struck me when I met you the first time as well was how self-assured you were, and how how did that feel, being the odd one out in some ways, and how did you deal with it, more importantly?
Yeah, and this goes back to that feeling that it all goes back to that breakdown that I had as a teenager and the way that I had this image in my mind that I needed to grow myself, give myself a foundation that was mine and everything else would grow on it that I felt like I didn't have. So by the time I went back to school, I I felt like I had that and I was really committed to not pretending about anything. So when I first started back, I didn't actually know what I was going to do. I didn't go back saying, oh, I want to, now I know I want to be a neuroscientist and this is my plan. I had always thought that if I went back to school, it would be with a plan. I even said that. I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in going back to college, but if I ever decide that I want to do something that requires a college degree, then I'll consider it. But then I had this after my second child was born and I was working in a coffee shop and it was really slow, so I had all this time and I was journaling and I realized I had this like thought that maybe there were some things that I didn't even know that I missed out on by not continuing with college, and that some of these things you could just learn on your own. Like if you're interested in literature, you can read literature. But then I was like, but what if there's some things that I can't easily do on my own? And the idea I had was advanced mathematics. I was like, I don't know if whatever comes, if calculus and beyond, I don't know that I can do that on my own. And I never explored that part of myself. And so then I had this whole different idea of like, maybe I do want to go back to college with no expectations to explore whether or not there's pieces of myself that actually are important that I want to develop. So when I first went back, I didn't have a major. I just literally was like, I'm just going to take anything that's interesting. Like I took Japanese literature and geology and psychology, and I was very like accepting of where I was, and where I was that I didn't know if any of this was important to me or not. And so at every step of the way, I think that self-assurance came from a super big commitment to not pretending that I was somebody that I wasn't and trying to be really comfortable in the reality of not what I didn't know and not wanting to pretend that I knew more than I did to myself or to the world. And then as I was doing that, I discovered this whole world of cognitive neuroscience, which was pretty new then, and found a professor and I did research. But even as I was exploring that, that was about after the end of my sophomore year, I guess, is when I started. After my second year, I discovered this, met a professor, he inspired me. But even then, even as I was finding success in that world, I was like committed in myself to this idea of listening to myself about what I was, who I was, what I knew, what I didn't, and not having my success or failure in school define me, but to be me and then explore the world. And so as I started having success in and deciding to, go to grad school and all of this stuff and become a professor at each step of the way, I felt like I already knew who I was, and that who I was not the same as what my accomplishments were. Like I really knew that my accomplishments were not me because I had been stripped of my accomplishments and I had grown up from them, and these were now just expressions of who I was, but they didn't define me. So somehow I was able to bring that to, I'm still able to bring that idea to my work life, that I'm comfortable in what I know and what I don't know in a way that um, makes me not feel like I'm faking it.
Well, you've had, I think, a very different kind of a journey, and the stripping. I guess a lot of people feel this kind of imposter syndrome, but maybe not too many people go through this extreme journey that you have. What would your advice be to people, and I think women specifically, in developing this sort of a self assurance, self confidence? Because I think there's a lot of it lacking.
Yeah, it's a question I've said, like, for me, I had to strip myself down to the core and grow myself back up, but it took like a lot of years and it was really painful. So I'm not sure I could recommend that to you. But I mean, I remember when I was in grad school seeing women going through this process of trying to figure out who they were, and I was like, I'm so glad I'm not having to do that. Like everyone was like, how do you go to grad school with kids? It must be so hard. And I'm like, yeah, but not really, because I know I'm not trying to also figure out who I am in this environment. So I think I'm not sure. So one of the things that I feel like I've learned over the years is, one, that there's no right way, and that means I don't really know what's right for other people. I have a very keen sense of how each person has to find their own way. So I'm not sure I know exactly how other women, especially in science, can deal with this. But I do think that for me, it always comes down to spending that time acknowledging to yourself where you really are and being yourself from there and following your own sense of what's right, and acknowledge, yeah, being honest with where you really are, and then acting from there. Not necessarily stripping down to having a mental breakdown, but seeing how much you can do some of that work without doing that. It being um, yeah, being authentic to where you are, and then you're not faking it because you're being who you are. But it's not easy. I mean, I work with a lot of the women that I work with have really strong feelings of inadequacy, especially in science, and yeah, they struggle with it every day, and it makes it hard for them to do their job because part of the job I have now is that we uh, need to convey a sense of authority for the clients to feel like they have this expert that they can rely on to help them. Like that's part of what they're paying for. So being able to access your own sense of authority but still be authentic to who you are is a trick that is hard for people. But I think, I mean, for me, I always just have to go to who I really am, and then it all comes from there.
Yeah, I also remember when you were talking, when we met the first time, you were also talking about how the academic world was basically a world of, it looked like a big boys club. Did you feel out of
Yeah.
place? And what did you do? Like, how did you fit in and make yourself comfortable?
Yeah, it's interesting because uh I didn't feel that out of place at all. I think because I still had, by the time I got to academia, I felt like I had chosen it from this place of having grown, if I hadn't broken down and I had just gone straight to college and then become a professor, I think I would still have at my core this deep feeling of imposter syndrome. But so I didn't really feel that out of place, or I felt comfortable in my skin even there. Um, but I clearly saw how this the things that were the way academia was is set up is very um, there is so much power imbalance in the way it's set up, and so little checks and balances on the power imbalance. It's nothing like the corporate world where, I mean, even though people misbehave, there are HR departments that hold certain standards. So it's almost like you have to at least behave because there's people looking over your shoulder. There's really nothing like that in academia. So it wasn't until I left that I realized how much worse academia was, even than my experience of business, because of this lack of oversight and the way these relationships that you have. I mean, you require letters of reference from people through your whole career, and you're at their mercy. And so there's all sorts of institutional misogyny and sexism that I observed in academia that, again, it was only when I left that I realized I just thought that was the world and I felt comfortable navigating in it. But uh, I, uh, I didn't think it affected me. But then once I realized how bad it was, I really yeah, I don't miss it, and I really appreciate the way that, again, I'm not saying that the business world is perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Clearly, there's all sorts of um, imbalance and sexism and things that people deal with, but it is amazing the extent to which yeah, I remember when I first started, just one of our primary clients is a big multinational, and they had so many women in positions of authority. I was like, and then, yeah, all of the ways that people can't just do whatever they want, and that there's standards put on really makes a big difference. And then listen to my authentic self and live my authentic self, even if my authentic self right now is I have no idea. But to have enough room to do that. So like by now it's become very core to who I am. I know a lot of the things I need to do to take care of my state of mind, and I do them, I take a walk every morning. Make sure that at the weekend I take a break from work and do things that help me feel in a rejuvenated place. At other times, what I needed to do was focus on whatever intense thing was. I can't remember exactly what I was doing in grad school, but I clearly, I didn't have a work-life balance. I had to focus on doing that, and our whole life revolved around making sure I could do that. But yeah, I think that idea of, again, it's not up to me to tell other people how to live their lives, but I find that if people can listen to themselves or figure out what's going on that makes them not even be able to hear, that usually results in them feeling going on a part of their journey that ends up becoming fulfilling. But it doesn't always look pretty as you're doing it, and it doesn't always result in a uh, the things that the external world would call success.
Just taking sort of a left turn from here, have you ever felt like a whole bunch of inertia, like you know this is something that you've got to do, your brain knows it but you're not able to execute it? How do you have any advice on how one might sort of extricate themselves from a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have that sometimes, right? Where you're just like, you end up sitting on the couch and then you're like, ah, I should have done something else. And you eat a bunch of chips and you're like, ah, now I have a stomach ache and I feel bad about myself. Um, uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just like, so yeah, of course, I've had those kinds of things, and I still have things in my life that I feel like I haven't gotten a handle on, that I'm still trying to figure out. That I, again, I think when I can get a perspective, I try to be gentle with myself, and um, again, be honest with where I'm at and why I need to sit on the couch for a while. Um, and then also see like if I get off the couch, if I have that inertia, I try to remember that the reason why isn't for again because somebody else is saying you're worthless, but because I feel better if I do something else. So, um, but that's yeah, I by no means have everything figured out. I think that's one of the things I've been realizing lately is that that's another um, benefit for me of the depth of and longevity of my relationship with my husband is I think that we're not apart very often, but the few times we are, I notice I'm like, I think maybe all these things it looks like I'm doing myself, I do a little better with when he's around. I can fall into a bit of a um, yeah muddiness. I think it's important to yeah to take note of your own mind, and I haven't had the situation. I haven't been to counseling in a long time, but lately I'm like, should I do I need to explore that again because I feel little edges around the edges of maybe I need to explore some things again, or maybe I don't. Maybe I just need to keep living my life. But I think again that like trying to hear what's right for you versus what you should do. For me, I've always found that I end up making better decisions when I stop thinking about what I should do and instead think about what feels right for me at that time.
Right. This has been really, really helpful, Elise. It was so good to catch up with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I look forward to your comments and feedback. Before you go, can I ask for a favor? If you like the show, would you consider subscribing? It's an easy way to support us, and we promise to keep doing what we're doing and try and do even better. Thank you.